Hello there. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at 5 of the shortest chess games that grandmasters have ever lost. And we're going to start off with the game Sapata against Anand, both grandmasters. The game was played in 1988, and watch what happened. Anand was black. e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes pawn, d6, knight f3. And we get this position, which is a normal position in the Petrov defense. And here white tries knight to c3. Now, the normal moves for black here are knight takes knight or the knight retreats to f6. Instead of that, Anand played the shocking bishop to f5. And now, after queen e2, he was forced to resign because he realized that he was losing a piece. For example, if you go d5, then we simply go d3 here, the knight is pinned, you're losing a piece. Or if you go queen to e7, to unpin the knight and protect it, then simply knight to d5. The queen is on, and c7 is on, and d3 is still a threat, so black's losing big amounts of material. So the question remains, how could a player of Anand's strength, he was 25, 55, only 20 years old at the time, around 20, but still, how could he make a blunder like this? Well, rumor has it that he'd been studying this variation, and one of the games that he looked at was the game between Tony Miles and Christensen, played in San Francisco in 1987. In that game, this exact position was reached, and very suspiciously, Tony Miles didn't play queen to e2 here. Christensen did play bishop f5, which is also very suspicious. So apparently what really happened is the game between Tony Miles and Christensen is actually a fixed game. Sometimes grandmasters do this, when they're tired and they don't really feel like fighting. So they get together before the game and they look at some variation and say, okay, maybe we'll play like this. They don't pay much attention to the correctness of the moves, and they said, okay, more or less this looks sound, so we'll arrange a draw here. And Anand, when Anand saw the game, he didn't stop to think about that possibility, and he simply copied the moves automatically. And when he got to the board and played, bishop f5. He was shocked because after queen e2 he's losing a piece. Anyway, that was game number 5. Let's move on to game number 4. Okay, so this is the game between John Nunn, Super Grandmaster, and Kirill Georgiev. And the game was played in Linares in 1988. Okay, this game lasted 42 moves, but Georgiev could have resigned on move 10. Let's see what happened. So we've got a Caro-Kann defense here, and of course, John Nunn plays knight to g5, a very tricky variation. One of the points is that after h6, we've got knight to e6. A little trick you can't take with the pawn, because then the queen comes to h5. Okay, and that would be checkmate. So Georgiev gives this check, and now after bishop to d2, queen to b6. It's a nice idea because the point now is that after knight takes, black can take back with his knight, and then those two pawns are hanging, which seem to force bishop to c3. And the bishop is not really on its ideal position on c3, because white would like to play c4 at some point, and it's not a good diagonal for the bishop. However, John Nunn didn't take on f8. What he did instead is he played bishop to d3. And now, when Georgiev got to this position, he probably thought, well, okay, this is one of John Nunn's sacrifices. It's true, he's got compensation after pawn takes. Maybe bishop check or queen check. Then my king will move here. My pieces will take some time to come out, but I think I can hold this position. Unfortunately, he overlooked something very simple. After pawn takes, he did take. This is a slow game, okay? I'm not showing you blitz games, okay? All of these games are slow games. And now, queen to h5, king here, and after bishop to a5, He really should have resigned. The game lasted 42 moves, but, Georgiev never had a chance. So, yeah, that was a very interesting game, but it's shocking that, a grandmaster like Georgiev would have missed something like that. Okay, let's move on to the next game. And this is the game between Petursson and Hans Ree. Hans Ree is a Dutch grandmaster. Okay, I've got to say, this game was played back in 1971, and maybe, well, actually, I think I know Hans Ree wasn't a grandmaster at the time. However, he was definitely grandmaster strength, and he became a grandmaster. I think it was only a couple of years later, and but as I said, he was world class already. So after this is what happened. English opening, pretty normal position. Well, actually, no, it's a sharp line. Okay, so knight d5, and normally here black can play moves like a5 or bishop to c5. Knight takes d5 is tricky. C takes d, and now e4 is a blunder, big blunder. Black should have played knight to d4, and this is a tricky move. White can't take on e5 because then queen to e7. And as you can see, the knight cannot retreat because knight f3 will be checkmate. For example, knight f3, knight d3. Knight f3 is checkmate. And a move like f4 doesn't really change very much because black's got queen to c5. And surprisingly, knight to c2, it's pretty hard to stop. Okay, so knight d4, white should take, pawn takes. And this is a normal position, black's not losing anything here. White's probably a little bit better, but, nothing else. So in this position, Hans Ree played e4. Quite a shocker, because now after pawn takes, queen to b3, it's a simple pin. When the bishop moves out of the way, white will take on b7 and win a piece. In this position, Mr. Hans Ree had to resign, okay? Just 8 moves. Okay, this was game number 3. Let's move on to game number 2. And this game is Vukov against Rozhkov. And the game was played in 1972. Rozhkov is a really strong grandmaster. Watch what happened. Okay, g6, bishop to g7. So black's trying to undermine white's center with c5 here. Okay, it's a good idea. Bishop e3, c takes d. This is fine, nothing wrong with this, because in this position, white's probably threatening to take that pawn. Even if we lose the right to castle after queen takes, king takes, it's not going to be easy to win that pawn back. Okay, black's got some compensation there, but not worth it. So pawn takes pawn is right. Pawn takes, and now black should simply go knight to f6 and castle as soon as possible. And when the knight comes to the c3, maybe the queen will come to a5, or even queen to d8. But instead of that, Rozhkov played a move that looks good at first sight. Its intention is good. Knight here. Now, black wants to put his knight on f5, which is a fabulous square for the knight. Adding pressure against d4, attacking the bishop on e3. The other knight is coming to c6. It seems to make a lot of sense. Unfortunately, he overlooked a very simple refutation. White can now go queen to c1, and the bishop on c8 is hanging, the knight is hanging, and after double checking the position for a few minutes, he resigned because he realized he was losing a piece for no compensation whatsoever. For example, if queen check, we can simply retreat our bishop. Oops, bishop to d2. And the queen is on, the bishop is on, the knight is on, he must resign. Quite a shocker, and I have to say, it's, Rozhkov is a really strong grandmaster. Well, he is getting old now, but actually I'm not even sure if he's still alive, because the game was played in 1972. Okay, that's more than 40 years ago, so maybe he's no longer alive. Okay, let's move on. And let's see, that was game number 2. Let's see game number 1. And this game was played by Grandmaster Ma Kun from China. rated 26-21, and black is Danny Rozhkov. Okay, let's see what happened. English opening, then e6. Black probably wants to go bishop b4 next, so a3, bishop b7, g3, queen here. And normally one would expect white to make a move like knight to c2 here. It looks like the book move. But instead of that, white played knight to b3, which looks a little bit artificial. Maybe it's okay if you follow it up with, a quick c5. Even if you give up a pawn, you'll get very strong bishops if black takes it. So knight e5 is critical now because the pawn on c4 is hanging, and you don't really want to move this pawn because your light squares become too weak. And there are tricks like queen to c6 coming. Yeah, this is nasty. Not c3 square, the pawn. Okay, so the critical move in this position was c5. Okay, now after bishop c5, knight takes, queen takes, bishop here. White's got very good compensation because, as you can see, all those black squares look a little bit weak, and white's got a powerful bishop. He's going to castle, put the bishop here, maybe rook c1. You've got to watch out for knight b5. Good compensation. Okay. After c5, maybe black can play queen to c6, attacking the rook, then f3. Okay, normal position. I guess this is what could have happened in the game. Okay, instead of that, white played e4, which looks like a big mistake because now black has knight to g4, and look at that pawn. It's not easy to defend that pawn. For example, if you try a move like, let's see, you can't put your queen on e2 or d2, or, well, certainly not on d2 because of knight f3, but if you put it on e2, the knight on b3 is hanging. So if we try a move like queen to c2, then knight here, it's curtained, because you're losing the pawn on f2. So after this move, white's only got one move. He can't play knight d4 either because of queen takes d4, and knight f3 is coming next. So the only move is c5, but now black's got a beautiful refutation. Queen takes b3, double exclamation mark. And at this point, Grandmaster Kuhn resigned because he saw that after queen takes, knight f3, if the king comes to e2, then we've got a knight fork winning a piece. So king to d1, knight takes f2, and again the king has to go into a square where we're going to get the knight fork with a completely winning position. Too much material. Okay, quite an interesting game and quite a surprising refutation. This queen takes b3 game was Kuhn against Rozhkov. The game was played in 2014. And that just about wraps up our video. Thank you very much.
See the subscribe button, hug it, show it some love. But above all, click it. And don't forget to visit our website, chess.clinic.